Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, Keeping in Solidarity, Self-Care, Community Care, and Ethical Leadership in Indigenous Health with Len-Pierre. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health, and we'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Please feel free to introduce yourself and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Soren Squawkin. I am the Learning Circle Manager. I am Seal Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory, Apache, and Belgian settler on my father's side. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. Joining us, working behind the scenes, is Cynthia, our production coordinator, and our program assistant, Kira. They'll be interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I will provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please look after yourself, and if at any point in time you need to talk to a friend, elder, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to Len to introduce himself.
Hi, Chika. Thank you so much, Serene. Ait Swale, Miadsa Plahuilum. Good day, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I know, speaking to a virtual room full of leaders, that you are being pulled in a million different directions. And the fact that you have chosen to be here is just, something that I hold very near and dear to my heart. So, not from the bottom of my heart, from my whole heart, I just raise my hands to each and every one of you and I say, Hi, Tzapka Siam. Thank you so much for tuning in to this virtual circle. As was mentioned, my name is Len-Pierre. My ancestral name is Palikulak, and I am Coast Salish from Katzie First Nation on my father's side and Musqueam First Nation on my mother's side. I am the owner and CEO of Len-Pierre Consulting. We are an Indigenous consulting group that specialize in education and training, project management, strategic planning, cultural advising, you name it. We support very large Western, colonial, and Indigenous organizations in their endeavors towards truth and reconciliation and embedding Indigenous cultural safety into their organizations. I come to you this morning with an open heart and an open mind, and I hope to be received in the same way. I share that with you because I come here in solidarity. I aspire to be an ally towards all of you as leaders in healthcare and in other professional domains, I imagine as well, education, social services, not-profit, government. I aspire to have your back. I aspire to be a resource. I'm here with the spirit and solidarity of you. I really appreciate Serene's opening words that some of the topics here can be emotionally triggering for some people, some of us, not all of us. I hold this space, and to all of my Indigenous friends, relatives, colleagues in this virtual session, I am here for the spirit of learning, to share with you some common patterns and trends I'm finding in this very unique era we find ourselves in the era of truth and reconciliation, the era of addressing widespread systemic anti-Indigenous racism in our very large colonial systems. I know that there's a lot to talk about, there's a lot to feel about, there's a lot to think about, and I'm really here to hold space with grace and humbleness and humility, and really grounded in my cultural teachings. I'm not here to call out any leaders or any systems in particular, but I am going to be very transparent with you in some of the issues and problems I find in our Canadian healthcare system today. In particular, issues that come up for us as Indigenous leaders and allies who are not Indigenous, but also find themselves in a leadership position, mobilizing this good work of reconciliation in healthcare. And in full transparency, Serene is a student of mine at UBC. I teach at UBC's Indigenous Health and Leadership program. And we were talking in the elevator during the coffee break, and we were talking about um, leadership pitfalls and self-care and community care for Indigenous leaders today doing this good work, because the work that we do is hard work. It's incredibly burdensome. It's incredibly challenging ethically and morally. And Serene, I had no idea, organized and coordinated the UBC Learning Circle. She was like, you have to come to the Learning Circle because we don't have these conversations enough around leadership self-care, leadership community care through a cultural lens. We don't talk enough about how to speak truth to power and keep our jobs. We don't talk enough about the ethics that are required to stay grounded in this work so we don't burn ourselves out, become toxic or jaded, or take it out on our own team members and communities that we all serve. So I'm here because Serene had this really kind and gentle invitation, and I was like, yeah, count me in. Count me in. Stephanie Jin, hands up to iHelp. Good to see you. Good to see your name in the space here. To all my iHelp students in the virtual space here. So that's my story, and that's why I'm here. I'm here to be in solidarity with you. I'm aspiring to only talk for about maybe 55 minutes or 60 minutes. And then I want to leave as much room as hi, Leanna. Leanna Curtis, shout out. I'm aspiring to only talk for about 60 minutes and leave as much room as I possibly can for an open dialogue, for questions, comments, reflections, aha moments. And because I know that you are all leaders, I know that you have tools in your professional tool belt, in your leadership medicine basket as well. So I would really like to keep this dialogic. Please don't let this be my big talking head for 90 minutes in this webinar. Um, I am calling to you live from my home territory of Keetsi First Nation, located in what is colonially known as the city of Pitt Meadows. So that's my introduction. I'm very happy to be here. We're here for a good time, not a long time. And I would really love to keep this engaging and dialogic. So I encourage you to interact with me, to participate with me, to please lean into this conversation. Please don't sit idly by and be a silent bystander. I invite you to participate. I love seeing all the little reaction emojis popping up on my screen, all the hearts. I love those. And I love all of the chat that I see in the chat box. That chat box is yours for the next 90 minutes. That is your way of engaging with me, to share with me any questions that are coming up for you, if you appreciate or echo what I am saying, or if you are having any aha moments like, wow, I never thought of it like that. Thank you, Len. That's your way of contributing to the learning circle that we have here. So I love seeing the chat in the chat box. Please keep it coming. I love seeing the chat box on fire. So let's keep it going. Okay, without further ado, why don't we go ahead and get started? Bear with me 1 second here as I share my screen. So this topic, I'm just going to bring on my chat box so I can see what folks are chatting about. All right, there we go. So I wanted to title this webinar Keeping in Solidarity, because I firmly believe that as leaders, we need to be in solidarity with each other, leaders who are doing this good work, because not by a show of hands, how many of you can let me know in the chat box, how many of you as a leader or a worker in this industry championing this good work have ever felt alone, isolated, or cut off in the good work that you do? Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Dakota. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Jennifer. All the time. And this is, I swear, by Colonial design. How the work that my team and I get to do at LPC is it's such an honor because we get to spend time with Indigenous teams and allied departments and organizations all across the country. And what are the most common themes we run into when we want to do reconciliation work, when we want to decolonize, when we want to address anti-Indigenous racism? The biggest feeling and emotion we come across is loneliness and isolation. And that ultimately results in burnout, feeling jaded from the work, or complete enmeshment. So, and that is just so heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking. It's diminishing to the spirit that we all have doing this work. So, I had it in my heart and in my mind to share with you some of my most favorite tools, my most favorite teachings, and my most favorite practices that I found useful in my leadership practice to stay grounded in solidarity with this work so I don't get burnt out, so I don't become jaded, so I don't drink the colonial Kool-Aid and just become another corporate Indigenous leader, perpetuating colonial agendas and ideology. And again, I'm not calling out any Indigenous leaders, but this is a common trend, a very common pattern I am seeing when we result to this default switch where we just want to survive the colonial systems, we drink the colonial Kool-Aid, and we start abiding by only colonial agendas. So I want to share with you tools and tips and tricks and strategies for staying in solidarity with the work, with other like-minded, like-hearted individuals like all of you who have amassed together from across the country, and of course, with communities, with our families and our relatives who have blessed us to be able to do this good work because we are not here by accident. We are here, we are all here because we stand on the shoulders of giants, incredible matriarchs and elders and leaders who have come before us. And our job, our very unique job, is navigating the colonial context that we find ourselves in today. So hopefully by 11 o'clock this morning, by PEST, you'll have some medicine for your medicine basket or tools for your professional tool belt on self-care, community care, and Indigenous specific ethics for your leadership practice. So I want to begin by, this is where I'm going to get a little bit spicy. If you've ever sat in one of my sessions before, you know how spicy I get by speaking truth, but in a kind, gentle, respectful manner. Thank you, Jessica. I love spicy too. Um, I want to share with you the very unique landscape that we find ourselves in. And sorry, not sorry. You sat in my class, Samantha Sam. Oh, hi, Samantha. Um, I want to be very transparent that this is the unique landscape that we as Indigenous leaders and allies find ourselves in. And it is a relationship with colonialism. And I feel like, let me know if you agree, I feel like we don't often get the time, the space, or the opportunity to be in a room with like-minded, like-hearted individuals and be like, yes, this is our problem. This is what we are up against because we're so isolated and categorized and marginalized and pushed to the fringes of our colonial organizations. So here's what I have found in the era of truth and reconciliation, where we hear about these amazing initiatives taking place in healthcare today, like anti-racism training, anti-racism policies, cultural safety, equity, diversity, inclusivity, reconciliation, decolonization. These are all wonderful aspirational initiatives. And every colonial organization I work with thinks that it is business as usual. And I'm like, it's not business as usual. So this is our context that we are navigating today. And that context, thank you, Meg. This context is really rooted in colonialism. It is a colonial jungle. It is what shapes our landscape all throughout this country today. I refer to colonialism as the matrix that we are all plugged into. If you've ever watched the science fiction movie, The Matrix, this is our matrix. We live in a hyper colonial country called Canada, and we're all plugged into it, and almost none of us, and it governs everything in our lives, and almost none of us know about it. Ultimately, there's many common patterns that I find within colonialism, but two things that really perpetuate harm against Indigenous leaders and their staff and teams is corporate ideology and colonial violence. I used to call this colonial ideology, but I think that it's really hard to see. We think as Canadians that colonialism is a thing of the past. And I'm like, no, it's really just transformed into what we see as corporate culture today or corporate ideology. It's the business as usual. I often call this the tyranny of efficiency. It's just where we're focused on productivity, and getting stuff done without pausing, without reflecting, and without being creative or innovative to challenge these very large colonial systems. And a really big element is colonial violence because even though we have decision makers and governing bodies that are committed to reconciliation, they are not exempt from their own biases, prejudices, and colonial ideology that informs their decision making processes. The manifestation is colonial violence within our own teams, organizations, and institutions. Unaddressed corporate ideology will give way to the burden of representation. Whoo! This I know you know. As Indigenous peoples, we are pulled in a million different directions, asked to sit on a million different committees, to engage with countless Indigenous organizations, policies, processes, initiatives. And of course, a really big burden and barrier I find is the reward for conformity. It's seen as a progressive step in the right direction when we elevate Indigenous peoples to executive leadership positions like vice presidents or executive directors, or sometimes organizations create an entirely brand new Indigenous department. And they say, wonderful, we're so glad, we're so honored that you have accepted this job, and you will help us and inspire this whole organization to transform our colonial systems to be more culturally safer. And we're like, yes, that's what I signed up. That's why I'm here. That's why I accepted the position. And we find that over time, our creativity, our innovation, when we bring it to the leadership table, is like, no, we can't do that. No, we don't have the money for that. We don't have the budget. We don't have the resources. That's moving too fast. But if you take care of these policies and these initiatives that we have agreed to that align with the corporate Western world and way of business, then you get to keep your job. And so we reward leaders by conforming them and assimilating them into the broader corporate ideology. We don't associate assimilation, colonial assimilation, like the residential schools and 60s scoop in the 21st century, but there is a huge reward for conformity. In my mind, that's just assimilation. It's a tool and a method of colonialism. Colonial violence, I often find that our workplaces can kind of become this petri dish where unaddressed colonial violence can manifest into lateral violence within our own teams. And I know you know this. I know I'm preaching to the choir, I'm singing to the converted. I know this is your world. And of course, on the other side, we can encounter tremendous amounts of burnout or enmeshment. And of course, people who might just become jaded or feeling hopeless and helpless and then leave the job. And then, you know, you have that if you have a very high transiency in your team. It's hard to keep health directors. It's hard to keep executive directors. It's hard to keep vice presidents. It's hard to keep coordinators. It's hard to keep managers because we are not addressing lateral violence and burnout and enmeshment. And I've also been in so many different corporate and colonial organizations. When we talk about these things and these things are happening, it's like, oh, we don't know what that is. But on to business as usual. And ultimately, if these things go unaddressed, the burden of representation will lead to hyper productivity, business as usual. We're moving at the speed of business, work yourselves to death, essentially. These are bosses and leaders who, when you try to call in sick, and they're like, okay, yeah, you can take a sick day, but can you get that report to me by, noon today? Um, or this very shame-based accountability, which is very transactional leadership, where we use reward and punishment as the motivator for a team or organization. And bosses and leaders are not the same thing. We have a lot of bosses in corporate colonial systems. We don't have enough leaders because leaders will speak truth to power. Leaders will take on, the burden for their team. Leaders will show up early, stay later. Leaders will, see their role and responsibility as in the highest service of the people that work for them. Unaddressed lateral violence will lead to things like lack of trauma-informed approaches. When you have Indigenous staff, even leaders, even Indigenous vice presidents, even Indigenous CEOs, Indigenous board members, Indigenous managers, Indigenous directors, executive directors, as Indigenous peoples, we are not exempt from our own traumas. And if we don't have a trauma literacy and a trauma-informed infrastructure in our leadership practices and day-to-day operations, we're not addressing some serious significant problems in these systems. Um, and of course, what I'm also seeing is a lack of equity-informed approaches and a lack of dignity-informed approaches as well. So one of the things, and this is for all my students here who are in my I Help UBC course, one of the most profound things that goes untalked about, unaddressed, or hush culture. We're like, shh. Hush culture is something we've learned from the residential schools is like, don't talk about your feelings, don't talk about your emotions, don't talk about the problems in the world. That's hush culture. We've learned that from the residential schools. And one of the biggest things I'm finding in teams and organizations is when we don't talk about moral injury as a fallout of good reconciliation work that's happening in teams and organizations. Now, if you're not familiar with moral injury, a lot of people think that surviving colonial systems is incredibly traumatizing. And I'm like, well, that can be true to a degree, but when you show up to work and you're being met with microaggressions and stereotypes and moral, spiritual, cultural, internal conflicts by corporate ideology and your own cultural traditional ideology as an Indigenous person, in my mind, that can be traumatizing, but it's less traumatizing and more aligned with moral injury. That our moral self is really sustaining the harms of being conflicted in our professional workspaces. So moral injury is where Indigenous staff are forced to operate in systems that violate their core values, cultural teachings, and ethical responsibilities. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been hired into some really cool jobs where I've been promised in the interview process and the onboarding process that I have power, autonomy, and wiggle room to be my Indigenous self and exercise my leadership practices. But I am constantly being told, no, you can't do that. No, you can't say that. No, you can't behave that way. No, we are not ready to have those conversations. And I'm like, y'all know what you hired me to do, right? You hired me to speak truth to power. And so I am always somebody that will ask for forgiveness before I ask for permission. And that's just been a tool that I've picked up in my leadership practice. So when I worked in very large colonial systems like health authorities, school districts, and colleges and universities, I was always in trouble. I was always in trouble. And you know, when your annual performance review comes around once a year, where you have to spend one-on-one with your manager, your boss, every single colonial organization I ever worked in, the first opening comments were, Len-Pierre does not like the rules. And I'm like, I love the rules. I love breaking them. To me, they're more just like guidelines. Anyway. Yes, thank you, Andrea. Totally feel this. I'm always in trouble. And I feel like that's part of our resistance as Indigenous professionals and staff doing this good work. If we're not getting in trouble as leaders every now and then, we're probably contributing to the status quo. And the status quo is colonial in nature. So there's a lot of audacity that comes along with this work as leaders and allies doing this work. We have to be audacious. We have to push the bounds, and that's going to come at personal risk, some personal risk of being reprimanded, of being disciplined, or have disciplinary actions against us. So we find a lot of structural and colonial constraints, ethical betrayal by institutions. This is where we're promised to have budgets, we're promised to have, supports, we're promised to have autonomy and agency over our own departments and teams, and then we're constantly told, no, 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 you cannot have these things. There's a personal responsibility without power. So this is where, we're promised power and agency and autonomy over our teams, our departments, our own procedures and policies and initiatives. And then they're removed from us upon being hired. And then now we have this huge personal responsibility to stay in that leadership responsibility, to take care of our teams and our people and serve our communities. But now we have no power. And then, sorry, not sorry, I'm getting spicy. Remember, I said I come with an open heart and an open mind. This is a result of tokenism. When we hire Indigenous leaders into jobs, promising them power, autonomy, agency, wiggle room, resources, and then those things are stripped, that is corporate and institutional betrayal, and it is a form of tokenism at the end of the day. And it creates this internalized conflict between worldviews, and of course, witnessing harms to Indigenous communities. So I feel like, moral injury is something that we really, really need to talk about at a regional, a local, a provincial, and a national level. Because if we want to be in solidarity, this movement that is happening across the country, we need to have these safe spaces to speak truth to power and share the common patterns that we are finding as leaders doing this good work. We need more circles of practice, community practice, and we need people in governing positions to be very aware of what moral injury is, and how it manifests at the end of the day, as well. By the way, if you like any of the images you see on the screen here, you are welcome to take a screenshot with your phone. You're welcome to pull out your phone and capture uh, uh, pictures of them. I normally say that at the very beginning of my presentations. And I always think it's like such a compliment when somebody raises their hand. They're like, oh, Len, can I take pictures of your slides? I'm like, oh, you like my slides? I'm like, oh, I'm so flattered. I have a very large team who teaches my curriculum, and some of them have come up to me and they're like, Len, your slides are so boring. And I'm like, rude. Good thing I'm not boring. But yes, you can use these slides as well. I just see this work as patterns and trends I'm finding. I think this is common knowledge for all of us here in the space. You're welcome to screenshot these and take pictures of them, share them. And I will upload these slides to my website at the end of today, so you'll have access to the full PowerPoint deck as well. Um, so I Circles of solidarity is a concept I've picked up by a non-Indigenous settler ally, cisgendered woman named Dr. Vicki Reynolds. Any Dr. Vicki Reynolds fans in the space here? I'm looking at the chat box. No, just me? Okay. Thank you, Adria. Connie, yes. So circles of solidarity is what I've picked up from Dr. Vicki Reynolds. And when she presented this at a conference I was at, I was like, oh, this is what we need in the Indigenous country. This is what we need in Indian country is we need more circles of solidarity so we don't burn out. So we have a circle of like-minded, like-hearted folks that we can stay in solidarity with and know that we're not doing this work alone. That's how I get out of bed and do this work every single day is I know I don't do this work alone. All my I help students, I know you're out there doing the good work every single day. For all of my friends and colleagues here, familiar names that I see Lori Harding, Lisa Main, Sam, Leanna, I sleep solidly every night because I know I don't do this work alone. I will feel burnt out. I will feel exhausted. I will be so upset and so angered and frustrated by these systems, but I can sleep at night because I have a faith that I'm not alone doing this good work. So we need to talk about and socialize solidarity in the good work that we do. So Dr. Vicki Reynolds has a very lengthy definition of what circles of solidarity is, and I've really broken it down to centering on these core areas. Um, Relationships of respect and dignity. It's a space where we can be loyal to each other. We can respond to oppression with action and responsibility. We can make repairs. We can respond with action. We exercise groundless solidarity. So when I think of groundless solidarity, I think of my dad's words, Richard Pierre, who's an elder on my team at LPC. He taught me since I've been a very young child, who was like, son, don't you ever be backwards. And I was like a teenager, and I'm like, what the hell do you mean by that? What do you mean? I don't understand. And so, what I learned now that I teach this for a living every single day is that I should never tell the world this is just about Indigenous issues. This is not just about Indigenous issues. That real groundless solidarity is looking at all humans and all marginalized, oppressed, and targeted groups in the world. That I cannot fight for Indigenous liberation and Indigenous rights if I'm not standing up and fighting for women's rights or transgendered rights or gay, lesbian, queer, bisexual, non binary rights. I cannot stand up for Indigenous rights if I'm not standing up for human rights suffering and genocide that's happening on the other side of the planet at this very moment. I cannot stand here and preach and ask the world to be on our side as Indigenous peoples if I'm not standing up for neurodivergence or people with disabilities or people who are using substances and are losing their lives in the toxic drug crisis at alarming rates in the public health emergency that we are in today. So groundless solidarity is standing up for human rights in general, but being very specific about the context where we are evoking our solidarity. And I try to share that every space that I get to hold because I know that if I share this every time I get to do a territory acknowledgement or I get to deliver a presentation or do a webinar or a workshop, anytime I get to hold space, I'm looking for solidarity. I'm looking for allies. If you're gay, I got your back. If you're a woman, if you identify as a woman, I got your back. If you're a person with a disability, I got your back. Because we need each other to do that, to speak truth to power and to dismantle these colonial systems of oppression. We need groundless solidarity as Indigenous leaders doing this good work. It comes from infinite responsibility, so we're never going to get it done and we're never going to get it right because this is lifelong learning and lifelong unlearning. And this is one of my biggest takeaways that I've ever heard from Dr. Vicki Reynolds is that we cannot fight oppression with oppression. And I see, with all due respect and all love in my heart and spirit, I see a lot of my relatives. I see a lot of my Indigenous colleagues who are very angry and strongly rooted in activism. And I say, that's okay. We need those people too. That's not my style. My style is hope, inspiration, medicine, healing, inspiring the masses as often as I possibly can, because those are the gifts that the Creator gave me. We have our warriors. We have our people that, slam their fists on the table. We have people that will point fingers and yell at politicians and decision makers. And I'm like, that's not me. That's not my style. Because I do not believe in fighting oppression with oppression. So if you want to address lateral violence in your teams and organizations, it can't be through colonial corporate means, colonial Western tools. It can't be. There's this quote by this famous guy. He's kind of famous. His name is Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein says, we cannot solve problems by using the same thinking we used when we created those problems to begin with. Albert Einstein. Therein, we can't solely rely on colonial Western ways of addressing lateral violence when lateral violence comes from colonialism. We can't address burnout and enmeshment with colonial Western ways of being and doing and knowing. And I also love this quote by Audre Lorde. Oh my God, Lauren, wow, you are psychically tapped into my brain. Lauren, you stole the words right out of my mouth. Audre Lorde says, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily defeat him at his own game, but they will never bring about true change. Whoa, that was like, I got goosebumps. I got hair standing up on the back of my neck. So we need our cultural teachings. We need our ancient philosophies, values, and wisdom that has sustained us from time immemorial to be the medicine and the antidote, to be the vaccine of colonialism that we find running rampant in our teams and organizations today. Oh, and we need big cultures of critique, big cultures of feedback. So, for all of you as leaders in the space here, I want you to just do a little bit of a self evaluation. How comfortable, open, and willing are you to receive criticism or feedback about your own leadership? We need cultures of critique. We need feedback culture in our teams. And I try to socialize this in my team as much as I oftenly possibly can. I am so honored to get to work alongside over 35 Indigenous and non-Indigenous consultants at LPC and administrative professionals. And I'm going to get t-shirts printed and I'm going to get it stamped on my forehead. I swear, feedback is our friend. And I encourage feedback in this team, laterally and to myself as well. Why? Because as a leader, I don't know everything. I think I'm a know-it-all most days. As leaders, we have big egos and we don't talk about that enough. But we need feedback culture. And as a leader, I need to be open to feedback because if I assume my language, my behavior, my attitude, my values, and my leadership practices are 100% okay, what do they say about the word assume? You're going to make an ass out of you and me. So we need feedback culture about us. So I just tell my team, I'm like, feedback is my friend. If there's anything I'm doing or behaving in a way that is not aligned with your culture, your values, your ethics, what you signed on for working here at LPC, I want to be the first person to know. Please don't let me walk out there in the world looking like a big dumb idiot. Pay me the dignity and the courtesy and the respect of letting me know how I'm fumbling. And lo and behold, guess what they do? They do it. They come up to me and they're like, Len, I have some feedback for you. And I'm like, oh shit. Sorry, not sorry. That's being working class, as Vicky Reynolds will say too. I'm not apologizing for swearing. But I'm like, yeah, they come to me and they say, Len, I have some feedback for you. And I'm like, then I know I said something or I did something, I behaved in a way that was not aligned with what we agreed to by working together. And I will tell you, as often as it might be a little bit offensive at first to receive that feedback, because we all have ego, um, what kicks in later is such gratitude and appreciation for knowing how I was being perceived by people that are very near and dear to my heart, people that do this good work and this hard work. I'm not going to spend too much time here on the Indigenous cultural safety spectrum. I think many of you are very familiar with the cultural safety spectrum because this is what we kind of live by and teach in the work that we all do. But I really just wanted to share with you how this model, this framework relates to leadership in healthcare today. Let me know if you agree with me or not. But I find that leaders in very busy organizations tend to be highly tolerated by negative, culturally avoidant behaviors that you see on the lower end of the spectrum here. I feel like this is a pattern I have seen. Let me know if you agree or not. That leaders, especially executive leaders, they're tolerated for their behaviors when it's superiority, apathy, dominating, saviorism, remaining silent, exploiting, consuming, being aggressive or violent in the workplace. I feel like these are tolerated by leaders in general, not just Indigenous leaders, but leaders in general, because it's like, well, their job. It's their job. They're just doing their job. And I'm like, well, that doesn't create, safe teams, safe workplace cultures. Thank you. Thank you. It's normalized. Thank you, Stephanie, for agreeing. Absolutely toxic. Um, and I feel like this is not the zone of transformation. It's not. If we have leaders that are preaching, speaking, committing to transformation, this is not the zone of transformation. This is the zone of avoidance. Nothing's going to get done, and then we as the Indigenous staff become the hamster in the hamster wheel. We're just running in circles and we're not getting anywhere with this illusion that it's progress. And I'm like, I don't know. I challenge that. So I call it supporting the tyranny of efficiency because it's the status quo. It's the default of every team and organization I get to work with. I see this in education. I see this in healthcare. I see this in government. I see this in policing. I see this in justice. I see this in social services. You name it. This is kind of like the cultural norm. It's productivity, productivity, deadlines, 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 hierarchy, hierarchy, hierarchy. And I'm not anti efficiency. I'm not. I'm very much pro efficiency. But our efficiency syndrome can be tyrannical. It can be. And it will come at the cost of Indigenous leaders and Indigenous workers doing the good work. You cannot be culturally safe in a tyrannical efficiency model. You cannot be inclusive. You cannot be diverse. You cannot be equitable in this machine that is just recycling and regurgitating the status quo, which is efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. And I don't know if you all know this. Where did I learn this? I learned this from colleagues of mine who work at Fraser Health, who one colleague, I think she was a social worker. She was sitting in, this is my early days of working in Fraser Health. She was sitting in one of my lunch and learn sessions on a webinar. And she taught me, she was like, Len, did you know our Canadian healthcare system directly mirrors and parallels our Canadian military system? And I was like, did you all know that? I did not know that. I learned that like 6 years ago, I think. Our Canadian healthcare system and our military system directly mirror and parallel each other because it's coming from this colonial box that recycles and gurgitates every single system that governs our country. And one is rooted in wellness and health and well-being of the population, and one is military and defense and violence. They use the same language like frontline workers. Where do you think the term frontline came from? It came from the military. And we call our nurses and our people who work with patients frontline. Um, we also have other things like boots on the ground. Um, there was another one. I'm missing it. What the heck is it called? Oh, there's an S bar. S bars are a situation, background, those things. If you've ever filled out one of those, those are directly coming from healthcare and was actually, derived from the military system. And we have a lot of hyper violent language that we see in the Western world too. When we say things like, oh, I'm going to take a stab at it. Two birds, one stone. I'm like, all those poor birds. Or even when we talk about um, our traumas, we say, oh, my traumas have been triggered. That trigger comes from, the analogy of a gun. Even ally, the word ally, who said that in the chat box? Even the word ally, thank you, Rhonda, comes from war, times of war, that allied countries are going to have this country's back. So that's how saturated colonial ideology is entrenched in our society. We live in it's the matrix, I promise you. That's how much it's just rooted in our own ideology today. Okay, so those are the problems. I'm done with the spicy part. Now let me share with you some of my own teachings, tools, tips, tricks that I have found to be transformative in my leadership practice so I don't get burnt out, I don't get exhausted, I stay in alignment with myself, and I stay in alignment with the teams that I get to work with, and I stay work-centered. What's really hard is to get self-centered in this work when you're constantly entrenched in oppressive systems. It's hard not to take this work seriously. And we take this so personally. But then my training kicks in. And I'm like, oh, I'm being self-centered. I have to remind myself to coming back to being work-centered. That boundary in my brain and in my ethics as a leader helps me stay grounded in why I'm here, why I chose to do the hard work and the hard work that we all do. So, this framework that I'm sharing with you is actually coming from Dr. Martin Brokenleg. Any Dr. Martin Brokenleg fans in the space here? Let me know in the chat box. Dr. Martin Brokenleg created this framework with colleagues of his back in 1988 as a resiliency framework on how to create strong, resilient Indigenous youth. And this is a framework I have lived by since I've been a leader for 27 years. I know I look so young. 27 years I've been in Indigenous leadership, but my career started in Indigenous child and youth care. And I found this model of Dr. Martin Brokenleg, and it was such a powerful model that when I left child and youth care and I started working with corporate professionals and I started being a leader in corporate colonial institutions, I carried this framework with me because we still need strong, resilient staff. We still need strong, resilient uh, teams. So here's a framework that I use for critical self reflection in my leadership practice. When it comes to belonging, the framework is made up of these four key areas that as human beings, we all need belonging, we all need mastery, we all need generosity, and we all need independence. And that's true and common and typical for Indigenous cultures and communities across Turtle Island. Yes, we're not all one big homogenous group, but every single one of us are rooted in these four core values and teachings. I would almost look at them as laws and ways of being. So when I look at my team and I examine my own leadership practice and how I'm exercising relational connection, I'm asking myself, are my team members feeling happy, grounded, and well and supported? When I do, they're not really performance reviews. In my company, we have check-ins, annual check-ins and twice a year check-ins, one face to face. And the first question I ask them is not, if they've been productive or if they've been efficient or how many things it is. It's not performative. I ask them, are you happy? Are you happy here? Like, are you part of a culture that you feel like you belong and that's aligned with your ethics and your values? The first thing I ask to every single team member, whether it's my finance manager, my executive assistant, my brand manager, my events coordinator, my consultants, my cultural advisors, my elders, I'm like, you've been here for 6 months. Are you happy? I hope you're happy. If not, what's going on. Um, and then I also ask myself, have I nurtured a sense of kinship? trust and a connection within the team. Trust is built is earned. It's not direct. And this is a really thing that's not often talked about in Indigenous teams and organizations, is that because trauma is something that has impacted each and every one of us, and I live by a trauma-informed rule and guiding star. I never take trust for granted. That trust can come as easily as it went. So I try to walk softly and gently with my team that I work with, that I'm always in that zone of aspiring for trust. And the way I run my business is not at the speed of business. I run my company at the speed of trust. That trust is a currency that we value in our team, because when the trust goes, this work goes. Our infrastructure, our policies, our processes will be nothing if we cannot trust each other. For all of my relatives in here who come from a canoe culture, think back to our time in the canoe. That if we're paddling in the same direction, before we get even to paddling, before we even get into the canoe with each other, we have to ask ourselves: Are we healthy? Are we bonded? Do we trust each other? Is there any shit we got to get out there in the air and talk about? Is there any things that need to be, aligned before we get to the work? If we're not bonded and socially cohesive, we're not even going to be productive or efficient. Mastery, which ultimately is about, self-determination and self-autonomy and self-agency. I ask myself, have I created space for team members to exercise agency and autonomy? When folks come work with me, I'm like, where are you going? Like, where's your career trajectory? Like, where can I help be a stone in your path? Or how can I be a paddle in your canoe? How can I be a navigator? How can I be of service to help you to get to where you want to go in this work? Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to be a consultant? Do you want to be an educator? Or are you just hoping to to be a really good cultural advisor or elder one day? How can I be of service to you? Do I know what their aspirations are? And have I asked myself, where do you see yourself growing next? Generosity, um, and I mean generosity at an interpersonal level, but also as a collective. How are we exercising our generosity? So I ask myself, have I made room for everyone to meaningfully contribute to their natural gifts? So I found that, and this is what I advise, because our team supports recruitment and retention for very large colonial organizations in human resources. And one of the things I'm constantly, I get into a lot of fights, as you can imagine. And the biggest fights I get into is going to be with HR and payroll finance. HR is around recruitment and retention, around decolonizing HR processes, and accounting and payroll is about pay equity. Those are the biggest things I'm always getting into headbutts with. But when it comes to HR and recruitment and retention processes, we have this way of assimilating Indigenous staff into roles and responsibilities and making sure they fill and tick off everything that we've created in the job description. Whereas I try to reverse that flow to make it more reciprocal and honoring of the Indigenous applicant. So when I'm consulting with HR advisors or HR people who are creating job descriptions, I'm like, create a loose template, because think about the personality, the attitudes, and the energy of the person you want to attract into that role, because that's the part that you want. The technical pieces you can train, but then also leave room for their natural gifts, their natural talents, and help build the job description around their natural gifts and talents. And that's what I aspire to do within my team and organization, rather than conforming or assimilating them into something they probably might not want to do. And the best jobs I've ever had, one of the best jobs I've ever had was at the First Nations Health Authority. My manager was Janine Stevenson, who's incredible nurse and harm reduction advocate, provincially and nationally. And she helped me she was the first person that ever said, she's like, yeah, we have that job description, but I left enough room in it for what you want to do. And I'm like, what? And that's already after I got the job. I've never been told that ever before in my life. She's like, yeah, I had to go toe to toe with human resources and your whole job description about it. But it's very loose, it's very fluid, it's very flexible. What do you want to do when you're working here? And I was like, that was the most empowering, the most anti-oppressive, most decolonial leadership thing I've ever seen. And that was from a non-Indigenous nurse. She describes her as like a retired street nurse. And so that was one of the most empowering things I've ever encountered in my career. And when it comes to independence, I'm really looking for and asking myself, have I supported team members in expressing their unique brilliance and independence? And am I shaping, roles around people's strengths rather than forcing them into these rigid structures? So this is just one tool that I will share with you lightly and with humility, a framework that I use for really helping me in my leadership practice. The last, or not the last, the next tool I will share with you. I only have a couple more slides, I promise, and then I'm going to zip it. Um, and this is an activity I did with my students at iHelp, the Indigenous Health and Leadership Administration program. I say that, whether you're a leader, if you've been a leader longer than me for several decades, if you are an aspiring leader, meaning that you're not in a leadership position yet, I'm like, go ahead and create your constellation, your leadership constellation. And people are like, what the heck is a leadership constellation? And I learned from, again, Janine Stevenson, who was an incredible mentor. She's still an incredible mentor of mine. She was like, Len, what's your guiding star? And I was like, I don't know. And I was like, well, what's your guiding star? She was like, communities. Community is my guiding star. I'm here for community. And if I'm presented with a conflict, like an ethical conflict or a leadership conflict, I have to bring myself to my guiding star. I'm here to serve communities. And I was like, oh, I like that. And she's like, that's how I stay grounded and consistent in my leadership practice so I don't get jaded by, being here too long. And I was like, wow, I love that. So she's like, Len, what's your guiding star? I'm like, I feel like I got more like a constellation. I got like a Big Dipper or Orion's belt going on. So I do this activity when I teach Indigenous health leadership at UBC. I'm like, I ask students to come up with their own constellation. This is my personal constellation of the ethics that guide the work that I do and have been guiding my work for probably a decade now. And that's community accountability. If I'm here and I'm not in service of community, I need to move on. And I've left jobs. I've left corporate, colonial, government jobs because I was no longer accountable to community. That broke my heart, but it saved my spirit. Broke my heart, but saved my spirit. When I left a job because I was no longer accountable to community, I became accountable to the corporation. And I was like, that's not what I signed up for. I gotta go. And sometimes leaving is your greatest form of resistance. As a coach, as an advisor, that's probably what you not would expect from a coach or advisor or consultant. But in this context, sometimes it's one of the cards you have to play. Cultural integrity. Cultural integrity is where I say, I will not negotiate culture. I will not forsake culture or cultural, traditional, indigenous ways of being and doing and knowing. I live by them. If people want me to be less cultural, I'm like, sorry, I don't work like that. That integrity, my cultural self needs to stay as a whole. I can't cede my culture at the door. I can't. I am rooted in culture. I am grounded in culture. The way I view and judge the world around me is through the cultural lens I've been raised in. And a lot of corporate organizations are like, that's too cultural. That's too spiritual. And I'm like, I don't care. That's what you signed me up for. That's why you hired me. And so again, you can imagine why I always get into trouble in very large colonial systems. Cultural integrity, I don't see my culture at the door. It's with me all the time. People in our community, I'm just being transparent with all my Indigenous relatives in the space here. People think we can disassociate or disconnect culture at the right time in the right place. Like, for example, holy, I'm getting spicy. I'm getting hot too. Oh my God. That's how you know I'm getting nervous. I have a lot of Indigenous leaders that say, culture and politics don't mix. And I'm like, so you can cede your cultural identity at the door when you're talking about politics? I'm like, no, culture is what we are, not what we do. It's what we are. It's what shapes us. It's what's created our framework, our mental framework, our spiritual framework, our emotional framework. And people think that you could just separate culture from the work that we do. So we that's coming from conformity. People want us to conform in certain areas. I'm like, no, I can't do that. I'm going to stay integral to my culture identity. Anti-oppressive. I come from a servant leadership. One of my most favorite shows in the early 2000s on APTN was Blackstone. Any Blackstone fans? I remember the elder in Blackstone said that leadership is not an elevation to power, it's a submission to duty. And I've always had a passion, a hit on for leadership, but it was never to dominate, it was never to be in charge, it was to inspire, it was to take care of people. It was to take care of people because every career I've ever had was always taking care of other human beings, counseling, teaching, social work, all of those. And leadership has been my most influential space where I can influence care and inspire and motivate humans. And so leadership is my passion, but it comes from this area of being a servant first. And then, of course, being very transparent. Transparency is something that is like a rule and a law in our household. We're a very transparent group. And I think that's because we have a spicy household of neurodivergent people all living under one roof. We're hyper transparent. Like you don't even have to guess what's going on in our brains. We're going to tell you. And I come from a big house culture too. So that big house culture is no decisions were ever made behind closed doors, traditionally speaking. And I find that a lot of leaders under corporate uh, values, are very limiting of the knowledge and transparency that they're sharing with the rest of their team, which doesn't empower people at the end of the day. The next framework I want to share with you is something that I've found to be really useful. I encountered it about 8 years ago when I was studying for my provincial instructional skills diploma, which was a top up to my teaching degree. So I have my teaching degree, and then I got a little topper upper. Words are hard. I got a little top up in my training on how to take my teaching practice and align it with adult education. And in my adult education training, I found this framework presented by Kidder, which is a framework I use whenever shit hits the fan, so to speak. And I'm like, oh, we think of things in right and wrong all the time. We're like, this is right, that is wrong. This is black, this is white. It's this or that. But what's hard when you're an Indigenous leader is sometimes you're met with problems by your staff, by your processes, by your policies. The decisions you have to make as an Indigenous leader or an allied leader is what happens when you're presented with a choice you have to make, but both are right. If I do this, that's right. And if I do this, that's right also. That's a very challenging ethical space to be in when you're presented with a fork in the road and they both seem like right decisions. And often for us as leaders, it's one is colonial and one is cultural. So here's an ethical framework I use to help measure my decision making process. So, truth and loyalty. If I'm presented with a problem or issue, what is the truth and what am I loyal to? And if I'm making a decision, does it benefit an individual or does it benefit the entire community? If I run into a problem and I have to make a decision, is the decision I'm making beneficial for the short term or the long term? And if I'm making a decision in my leadership practice, is the decision I'm making aligned with justice or mercy? So, for example, let's say there's a student in my classroom and I've guided them through, Indigenous education, and I've trained them for healthcare. And then they come up to me and then they're like, I need a job reference. Can you be my reference for this job application? And I really enjoy this person. They're super cultural. I really enjoy their personality. I've had a lot of fun with them, and I'm like, what, you really weren't aligned with trauma informed, dignity informed, really, it's not aligned with my own ethics. I will take myself back to this framework and say, what's true, what's loyal, is it benefiting the individual or the community? Is it benefiting the short term or the long term? And is it benefiting justice over mercy? And it gives me this framework that I could do a self reflection inwards to examine which step I want to take. So, in my mind, Lisa Main, my good friend, colleague, who I've had the incredible honor of working alongside for a couple of years now. I'm so glad to see you in the space here. This is a framework I've picked up from Lisa Main, who's an incredible Indigenous leader on Vancouver Island. Um, we were working together on a project, and I was talking about and training uh, people in trauma informed practice, but also equity informed practice. And Lisa shared with me the definition for dignity informed practice, and that we really must use all three of these elements in the work that we do. My argument is in large colonial corporate organizations today, it's not enough just to be trauma informed. It's not. We need to be able to do something with that information. Therein, we need to be equitable, and we need to respect the human rights and the dignity of the people that we are working with. So trauma informed practice, recognizes those targeted traumas, intergenerational traumas, and how that leads to widespread Indigenous health and social inequities today. Equity informed practice is really recognizing that we don't treat everybody all the same. And in my team, I don't treat everybody all the same. We are driven and addicted to equality in teams and organizations, but equality is not the same thing as equity. Equity is giving more time and attention where time and attention is due. So when I'm working with elders, I'm equitable with the elders on my team because they need more time and they need more attention because they're not as skilled as we are, some of them. I have some very tech savvy elders in my life and some that are very new. And they're like, no, I don't do that. That's not my way. I'm like, that's okay. It doesn't have to be your way. We will work with that. I have students on my team, and I'm like, okay, well, then, if you can't do certain things, I will work with that. So I don't come from this addiction of treating everybody the same. Dignity is really centering the person's inherent worth to uphold respect, autonomy, and reduce shame, honor boundaries, and strengthen trust. And I look for embedding these into all of teams and organizations. And it's what I live by as a leader as well. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to pick up speed here because I know some folks are running out, and I really want to get to good questions, comments, and more of the dialogue. This one's really kind of self-explanatory. I've already kind of covered this. This is more like summary. It's just comparing Indigenous and Western approaches to leadership. So you can screenshot these with your phone because I've covered most of these topics already throughout the last 60 minutes. It's just showing the polarity. And what Jeannie is like, I've screenshot so many. I'm like, thank you. Such a compliment. My heart is full. My cup is full. But the real essence I wanted to give you here, the tool and the framework that I live by is two-eyed seeing. Two-eyed seeing is not picking one or the other, but using the best of both worlds for my leadership practice and not forsaking one for the other. And it's what I found to be the most transformative, useful tools in my professional toolbox is the tool of two-eyed seeing. Okay, last couple slides. I promise. I don't know if I'm promising something I can't keep my promise to you. This is just gentle reminders for you. So I am going to slow it down because maybe this is a message you need to hear loud and clear today, that we as leaders, this is a common pattern I find among us as leaders as well. We as leaders sometimes do it all. We do the hard work. We do the hard work. And sometimes that will come at the cost of our own self care. And so I want to remind you of taking care of yourself while you are doing this work. Gentle, friendly reminders. And so when it comes to decolonizing leadership and staying grounded in solidarity with this, I really want to remind ourselves of the teaching of balance. This is not about perfection. In full transparency, perfectionism is a value of colonialism. It's in colonial narratives that we talk about the perfect land, the perfect family, and the perfect institution. But there's no such thing as perfection, and we are not perfect human beings. What I do strive for is balance. I strive for balance. So when you think about your leadership practice, don't forget to the gentle, humble reminder to balance. That's not getting too close to the work, not being too distant from the work either. There is the challenge of taking on the entire system, but there's also the work of today. There's the work of the immediate now in the sense of the urgency of stuff that needs to be taken care of today, but also reminding ourselves that this is intergenerational work, that this is a 150-year project and pathway that we are on, that, we are just one generation out of the 7 generations that is on the healing pathway from colonialism, and that all our job is to do as much as we can with the time that we are given, but it cannot come at the cost of our own sense of health and wellness and connectedness to this work. And then, of course, balancing our holistic mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical wellness, and balancing our team community care with our self care as well. And maybe, you know, you need a reminder that you are worthy of self care. And the biggest thing I find among Indigenous leaders is that we need to be reminded that we are worthy. No, you don't need to get to that report. No, you don't need to get your emails down to 0. No, you don't need to check your emails at 9 p.m. and then get to self care. You are worthy about self care in this very moment. And that's not selfish. um, Leadership is not about being selfless. If we want to be selfless, you first have to be selfish. And that's balance as well. So we have to also examine that some of my best experiences of self-care has been learning how to let things go, which is easier said than done. And I say that, our ancestors were incredible therapists, probably the best therapists that have ever existed on the planet, our ancestors, because of the ceremonies they created or the ceremonies that were gifted to us by the creator to take care of ourselves. If you look at every single ceremony that we have on Turtle Island, cedar brushing, smudging, burning, all our ceremonies are about process and letting go. And I think our ancestors were quite brilliant to know that we as human beings covet. We hold on. We hold on to shit that doesn't necessarily need to be held on to. So we have these ceremonies to help surrender, to help let go, to help process the things that we're dealing with. And as human beings, we have over 10,000 thoughts every single day. Where do those thoughts go at the end of the day? If we're not processing our thoughts the way we're processing our food, you eat 3 square meals a day, some snacks in between, and your body reaps the things you need to survive, like vitamins and nutrients, protein, fats, and carbs, and it eliminates the things that you don't need. It's the same thing for our thought processes. You have 10,000 thoughts a day. You need to process them, harvest from them the things that you need, and eliminate the things that you no longer need. If you don't process and you don't let go, our elders say that will turn into bad medicine. So don't forget to, take care of yourself by processing and letting go some of the things that no longer serve you. And if you don't have access to ceremony, here's my modern day hacks. Who said BTT works? Samantha Sam, BTT works. Thank you. I've been sharing this for years. I learned this from my therapist, my counselor, that bathroom tissue therapy, BTT, If you're having a thought, an obsessive thought, and you can't sleep at night, it's 2 a.m., and you're like, why can't I get to sleep? Why can't I get over this thought? Get up, go to the washroom, write it down on a piece of toilet paper, put it into the toilet, say a little prayer to yourself, surrender it to the creator, and flush it down the toilet, and watch it literally release and be surrendered from your mind and your mental framework. I live by it and I swear by it today. So, lastly, in closing, I just want to, share with you that I'm so incredibly honored that you've taken the time to be here. That staying in solidarity with the good work means knowing when to set aside colonial tools because they serve a purpose. Indigenous leadership can make use of Western approaches, but it must not be grounded. But it has to be grounded first in relationality, balance, and interconnectedness, why we showed up to do the work that we do anyway. Our strength comes from leading in a way that honors our teachings, our responsibilities to one another, and the ethical commitments that keep us going and keep us together. When we lead from this place, we do more than manage systems. We sustain our teams and protect purpose, and we stand firmly in our shared humanity. So with that, I just want to say Haitsap Gasiem. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for leaning into this conversation. We have 15 minutes or 10 minutes for an open Q&A. I welcome any and all questions, thoughts, and reflections. And I'll leave you with this quote by my pops, Elder Richard Pierre, on our team. May we continue to walk in a good way. May our words come from the heart. May we always be open to learn, to share, to trust in ourselves and each other. And may we never forget who walks beside us and who is still yet to come. So, Haichika Siam, thank you so much. Right after this webinar, I will post this slide deck as a PDF on my website at lenpierreconsulting.com. If you want to follow more of this big talking head, Lisa Main, Lori Harding, you all follow me on social media. You are welcome to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. I have a business account, an LPC account, and I have a personal account. If you follow the business account, you're going to stay up to date with the latest and greatest of resources and workshops our team is producing. If you follow my personal page, you're going to get pictures of my cat, pictures of my wine, pictures of the meals and the workouts I'm doing on that day, but you're welcome to follow both. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Len. You were amazing as per usual. And we have tons of questions. I've narrowed down just a few. One, I just kind of want to start with this because I feel like it's really relevant to the conversation. We had someone say that they totally agree with cultures of critique. Unfortunately, in current political environment, any critique is seen as hate speech, and people are afraid to speak up. Um, they would love to hear how to maintain safety while speaking truth within your role.
Yes. Okay, so this is a tricky one, and I teach feedback culture on the regular. There are some tips and tricks and strategies. And if you supervise a team and you're encouraging feedback culture among your team and organization, there's an art and a science to offering feedback. Number one, please don't make it emotional. When I say making it emotional, meaning I feel this, I feel that, you are doing this, you are doing that. When you make it about facts, when you make it about language, when you make it about behavior, it now becomes a workplace safety issue. And whose job is it to be safe in the workplace? It's all of ours. So I feel like when you say feedback culture in teams and organization, it means that it's the free range to go and say anything that we're thinking or feeling in that moment. And we know there's a lateral violence that happens in teams and organizations too, especially Indigenous teams. People think it's like, you said that and I didn't agree with that. I saw you post this on Facebook, or you made me feel this. That's not real feedback. And it's not feedback that is healthy or constructive. But if you make it about language and behavior, it's now a workplace safety issue. And if you make it driven in facts, you make it about shifting from like me versus you to the responsibilities of the team, the ethics of the team and organization, the values that you stand for, and of course the overall organizational culture and professionalism. So I try to go for not just the me and you conversation and the feelings, but make it factual, make it language and behavior. Those are the greatest mechanisms for mobilizing feedback that organizations will have to deal with. Politicians get lost in it all the time because if they're using the call out culture. You're doing this, you made me feel this, you're doing this. This accusatory feedback is where people just get met with resistance. To be ethical and professional, facts, language, behavior, now it's really about professionalism.
Thank you. Yes, that's a great one. And the next question is, what emerging trends or practices in Indigenous health leadership excite you the most?
Ooh, what trends in health leadership?
Indigenous health
Um,
leadership.
Lots. I see lots. I have such an incredible honor. There's, oh my gosh, too much to name. Lots of great transformation work that is taking place. Circles of solidarity that I see happening, not circles of solidarity, circles of practice. I see happening in certain places. I do see leaders exercising servant leadership as a way. I also like seeing spicy leaders getting really spicy and speaking truth to power. One of the most transformative things that I think has been a real big game changer is non-Indigenous peoples speaking truth to power and advocating for Indigenous rights and challenging colonial harms and narratives. Um, and calling out people who are harmful. Like this rise of denialism is something that's, again, eating away at my spirit. And I try not to let it get to me. And I'm like, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't type anything, don't respond to anything. And then I cave and I buckle. And then I'm like, I'm gonna say something. And as soon as I open up the comment section and I see things like Dr. Lori Harding has already responded, many non-Indigenous allies have already responded and says, not on my watch. I'm gonna go say something and I'm gonna speak truth to power and challenge this person, call them out, call them in, whatever. I'm like, I didn't have to. I didn't have to. And when I see non-Indigenous leaders in health speaking up and advocating for cultural safety, anti-racism, and really using the tools, tips, tricks, and strategies that have been gifted to them by elders and other Indigenous leaders, that's the zone we want every health leader to be in this jungle of a health system.
Mhm. Thank you. I love that. I love that you are also just kind of like taking that time to self-care for yourself. Like you wanted to go there, but you also knew that it's just you checked and that it was already done, right? Like you don't need to pour from an empty cup. So that's great modeling for even just for yourself. So that's cool. And that kind of leads into our next question. So you gave the example of your non-Indigenous manager giving you space to develop the role and figure out what you want to do in the role. What are some other powerful ways non-Indigenous leaders can be more of an ally with our Indigenous leaders and colleagues?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. Um, Stop saying no to your Indigenous staff. Stop saying no. Say yes. Say yes and take their idea and run with it and advocate it as if it was your idea to begin with. Believe in it. Find a space in it. Stop saying no is a really, really big one. Another one I've seen is pause if we're not in the room. And that's one of the greatest managers I've ever had was like, we'll stop a meeting, and great teams have done that too. They'll stop a meeting, they will what is it called? Blockade something if I'm not in the room. That saying nothing about us without us. And if we're stuck in the tyranny of efficiency syndrome, people are like, oh, Len wasn't here. Oh, Len didn't look at this. Oh, we didn't get Len's feet on by that because we are pulled in a million different directions. I've seen people pause the system until I was in the space. So pausing meetings, pausing policies to be signed off on, projects to be signed off on until it kind of like had Len's kind of review. So knowing when to pause and include your Indigenous people who are on your team if it's within the respective roles and responsibilities. If you have an Indigenous secretary and it's not their responsibility to look at the policy, don't burden them. I was in that position because it was part of my role and responsibility. And because of the burden of representation, I was absent from a lot of committees and project meetings and all of these things because I was pulled in. I can only clone myself so many times. I can't even clone myself. So I really appreciate it when people have stopped the system to allow me to be in the space and represent what I represent. So pausing, stopping, saying no to really, even though I was not in a leadership position, I remember feeling treated as if I was. I remember being the lowest paid person on the team and the only Indigenous person on a team, but I remember feeling like I was treated as a leader. So that was one of the most empowering things as well, where my director and my manager were like, "Well, that's in Len's shop. We need Len's approval. We need Len's authority." You know how we treat leaders? We need to have that same attitude and actions how we treat Indigenous staff who are doing this good work. Um, and that largely came from they were non-indigenous leaders. They were allies, but they knew that they only had so much limited knowledge and
Mm,
nothing about us without us. So they were like, no, let's ask Len. So I remember feeling treated as a leader before I was even in a leadership position. That was probably the most empowering and where I exercised a lot of, really great leadership tools too.
great, thank you. And that question also kind of leads into this question of how do you navigate among conformists? Some are so well rewarded by the system and perform leadership tasks that really harm society and are rewarded further. In small societies, for example, this person's from Greenland. Um, that they've noticed that, and how do you navigate among conformists?
Hmm. Well, it's very common. It's a very common pattern when we have, conformity taking place in very large corporate structures. I see it more often than not. And that's just, I think, a natural pitfall that we find ourselves in this progressive direction that we are in for truth and reconciliation. I like to move away from the good bad binary, and I say it's a natural pitfall, and we will get over this pitfall. I don't look at it as good and bad because good and bad thinking, black and white thinking is colonial thinking. So when I am being led by or working with conformists, I really try to lean in and use a we based approach, like a we based culture. And I've been in meetings, I've been led by leaders who were conformists. And I'm like, I will say, like, this sounds colonial, this sounds corporate, this sounds misaligned. And I will say, can we be less colonial? Can we be more culturally safer in this strategy or whatever topic is at hand, whatever agenda item is being discussed? So I try to use we-based culture, we-based, team-based approaches rather than calling somebody out, because calling somebody out who you work with, especially a leader, will not end well. Um, and then if it gets deeper, where I'm getting moral injury because I'm being led by a conformist, I will then call somebody in. And I've called in leaders where I have been hurt, and I'm like, I appreciate this person, I respect this person. And full transparency, that's easier for some of us than most of us. Not everybody feels comfortable or safe going to their supervisor, their boss, their manager, their coordinator, their director, their supervisor, their executive director, their vice president, and saying, I'm not happy here anymore. I feel like we're going down a path that is not what I signed up for and what is being presented to communities. And I just want to let you know that. And I've done that. I've been people who signed off on my paychecks. I've had to go have those conversations. And if that's true for you, I would say about 10% of us on this call are like, no problem. Roll up our sleeves. I'm like, I'm gonna go talk to my boss. I'm gonna talk to the person. I have no fears, no qualms, right? The rest of us are like, that's uncomfortable. That's not safe for me. That's I don't feel good about going to talk to somebody who signs off on my paycheck and supervises me. How I got around that, it was actually somebody from another mentor of mine, Salish Wesley. who's Stolo, incredible Stolo knowledge sharer holder, matriarch. Um, she gave me a tool when I was in my teaching degree at UBC at the NITEP program. And she gave me this lesson when I was like 20 years old, studying for my teaching degree. And she said, I did not work this hard and this long just to become another Indigenous worker. And I was like, when she said that at my 20-year-old young brain, I was like, wow, I did not come this far, work this hard just to conform, just to assimilate, or just to get a paycheck. Um, that simple phrasing of really empowered me to say what I am in control of what I sign up for. If I am here, I am choosing to be here. And I can share my truth. I can be transparent. I can share my feedback. Now it's out of my hands. It's in their hands. They're gonna deny it, resist it, or receive it and honor it. And the outcome is the outcome. And if they meet me with resistance or denial, and I'm like, okay, I said my piece, and now I think it's time for me to go. But that's a place of privilege. I was in a place where I could leave because people were throwing jobs at me back then. Not everybody can just get up and leave their job. But if you can then come back to staying grounded in solidarity, why you're here and why you're doing this work, you're following your constellation, at least that can help you sleep at night. We cannot control the conformists. We can't. What's ethical is responding to things that you don't agree with. That honors your spirit, right? You might be brokenhearted, but we all go to work with broken hearts, don't we? We all do. What we cannot help is when it shatters our spirit. That's really hard to overcome. But if you can be ethical with yourself and say your piece, you can't control other people. You cannot. You can leave the situation or you can stay grounded in solidarity. That's at least how I sleep at night.
Definitely. It's a little bit over our time, but we had a ton of great questions and you answered quite a few of them. I know most of the questions are just asking for resources and whatnot. So I believe you have your website that we'll be posting on the landing page for everyone to look at. And then we'll also be able to post the slides, if I'm correct, Len.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, yep,
Yeah.
cool.
I'll post
And
them on my
that
website.
was and I'm sure if everyone wants to check out both the slides and Len's website for more additional resources, we can provide those. I'll just let Len say some last remarks before we close the webinar.
Just for my whole heart, Heitzep Kassiam, I raise my hands to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for your time. Your time is so precious. And I know you could have been in a million different places today, but I'm so glad that you were here in a virtual room full of like-minded, like-hearted individuals. Take care of yourselves tonight. Have a great rest of your day and have a great restful weekend ahead of you. Heitzep Kassiam. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. It was so great just to be able to learn a bit more about how to maintain our own self-care, but also community care, while also being able to uh, exercise our ethical leadership within Indigenous health. And I know it's always such a treat to be able to be in a space with you and learn from you. I am constantly learning and I appreciate the opportunity to have that. And thank you. And so just before we end the webinar, I'd love to bring your guys' attention to the next learning circle next week that we'll be having, and it's Healing as a Decolonial Resistance, the Challenges and Hope of Indigenous Cultural Supports Inside and Beyond Prisons. That's on December 10th, 2025 from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And all of our webinars are free to sign up for on our website at www.learningcircle.ubc.ca. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Learning Circle. Limit, thank you. Bye.